Dear students, welcome to Mayura Virtual Academy. In this session, we'll be learning about fragments. Fragments forms a portion of the user interface in an activity. So, which means it is a piece of an activity. We can call this as a sub-activity. By using the fragments, it provides the more modular design for an activity. It has got its own layout and its own behavior and the life cycle and callbacks similar to the activity. So we'll be adding the fragments into an activity. So whenever you add a fragment into an activity, the view of the fragment will be coming into the view group hierarchy of the activity. So it has got its own layout and the life cycle callbacks. So we can add multiple fragments into the activity. So at any time in the same activity, we can add or remove the fragments. The activity will be running in the background, and on the top of that, we'll be adding the fragments. The main use of the fragments is for the scenarios where you want to give the user with an interface such as the stack like user interface or the card like user interface. In such scenarios, we'll be using the fragments. And the one more advantages of using the fragments is it provides you can use the same fragments in the multiple activities. So the design becomes more modular and it provides we can reuse the code in the many ways, as we'll be using the same fragment for the different conditions. So the reusability of the code will be also more, and it provides the dynamic and the responsive user interface. So coming into the scenario, say where you have scenario like this. Suppose on the left hand side, you'll be given with the list of news article. If you come up with the news application, on one side you'll be having the list of news articles. On the right hand side, you'll be able to read the applications. So if you design this application with the activities, what happens is whenever you click on some article, the corresponding new activity should be created. Suppose if you have some 10 or 20 articles in the list, and if you are going ahead with the activities, each time you click on say the particular article, if there are 20, you need to create 20 activities. That can be overcome by using the fragments. So this can be designed using the fragments. Whenever you click on the article, the same fragment can be used for the multiple ways, so that we can provide the dynamic user interface, and also the reusability of the code increases. So the same application, if you are using for two different scenarios, one is for mobile and one more is for tablet. And the other use of using the fragments is, say in the tablet design, say if you are creating the same application using the activities, you need to launch every time different activities. So for the dynamic design, if we can say divide the entire layout into two pieces, so we can use two different fragments. The same fragment, each fragment will be running on its own. It has got its own life cycle. So whenever you click on one particular article on the right or left side, on the right side, the corresponding the article will be displayed, so that the design becomes more dynamic. The life cycle of fragments is closely related to its host activity. The fragments won't be knowing that on which activity it has been hosted. So whenever you pause an activity, all the fragment that is hosted on that particular activity will be paused. And similarly, when you stop an activity, all the fragments that is associated with the activity will be stopped. But otherwise not correct, in the sense whenever you pause a fragment, but still the activity can be in the resume in the foreground, in the sense the activity will be visible to the user. So it doesn't mean that whenever the fragment pause, the activity should pause, but otherwise correct, when the activity gets paused, all the fragment that is associated with the activity will be paused or stopped according to the scenario that we'll be executing. And as I explained earlier, the main use of the fragments is it gives more flexibility and removes the limitation of having only the single activity on the screen at a time. Which means, say if you are using the activity, you will be having only one activity for entire screen. So that limitation can also be removed. We can have two different views which is independent of each other, and when you perform some operation on one particular fragment, dynamically we can display the corresponding operations on the other part, so that we can have multi-pan design in one screen. So that is the advantages of using fragments. So now coming into the fragment life cycle. The fragment has got its own life cycles similar to the activity, but the fragment life cycle is almost similar to that of the life cycle of an activity. Whenever you launch a fragment, the first it will be calling an unattach method. As I told earlier, the fragments will not be knowing on which activity is the fragment has been hosted. So in unattach method, we'll be getting the information about the activity on which the fragment has been hosted. So we can get the instance of an activity in the unattach method. Once the fragment is attached, it will call onCreate method, where we'll be initializing all the initial components that is required for that business logic in the fragment. Once the initialization is done, it calls onCreateView. In onCreateView is a method where the view will be drawn to the user in the user interface. Once the view is drawn, it will be calling onActivityCreated. In this method, we can get the instance of an activity and the fragment, where we can initialize the data using findViewById. Once activity created is happened, it will be calling onStart, where the UI will be visible to the user and it will be transient. It will be there in onStart method for very short period. It will be coming to onResume method. OnResume method is where the fragment will be running and the user can interact with the fragment. Whenever the other fragment or the other activity launches, the fragment will be going into the pause mode, and other activity or the fragment will be coming into the foreground. In this scenario, most probably we'll be using the multiple fragments. Whenever other fragment is launched, the fragment that was present will be going into the unpause mode, and if the user is navigating back, it will be coming foreground once again to the resume. Otherwise, the activity will be the fragment will be stopped and destroyed. In the destroy view, the view whatever that is created will be destroyed and it will be detached from the activity. So this is the life cycle of the fragment. So even if the fragment is destroyed, the activity can be running in the foreground. As I told earlier, whenever the activity goes into the pause mode, the corresponding fragments, all the fragment that is hosted in the activity will be paused. But whenever the fragment is detached, the activity can still be running in the foreground, because the activity can have a multiple fragments on its view. So as I explained, unattached method is where we get an instance of an activity. We get the reference of an activity in which the fragment is hosted. OnCreateView is where we initialize all the components that we need to be returned. OnCreateView is called only one time to draw the user interface. Activity is created, in the sense it will be calling the OnCreateView of an activity, where we can access all the components using findViewById. OnStart is called once the fragment is visible. During the resume state, the user will be having interaction with the fragment. OnPause state is called indicating the user that the fragment is leaving, and whatever the changes that we need to retain or persist, we need to perform all those operations. During onStop and onDestroy, the view whatever that is created will be destroyed, and final cleanup will happen in onDestroy mode. So whenever you want to create a fragment, there are two things that is involved. One is fragment manager and the fragment transaction. You can get the instance of fragment using fragment manager. So we'll be creating fragment object and we'll be getting the instance of the fragment manager using fragment manager get fragment manager, and you'll be getting the instance of the fragment using the transaction, fragment transaction. You'll be using the fragment manager object and begin the transaction, and you'll be creating the new fragments. In this case, I have created the fragment as example fragment. I'll be creating the object of example fragment, and you'll be in the activity you'll be creating the layout in such a way that in which the place or the container you need to display the fragment. Previously I have shown you that on the left side you need to display the article, and the right side we need to display the article description. So that ID will be using where this fragment need to be replaced. We'll be using the fragment transaction dot replace, and we'll be adding this fragment. And this is the method that we'll be using add to backstack, which means that whenever the fragment is added, whenever the user clicks on back button, the entire activity will be closed. So if you are using multiple fragments one on the other, whenever the user clicks on the back button, suppose you have launched fragment 1, fragment 2, fragment 3, whenever the user clicks on back button, from fragment 3 it should go to fragment 2, then to fragment 1, then close an activity. If you are not including this add to backstack method, whenever you click on the back button, entire activity will be closed. So this is the method that we will be using so that the activity can have the instance of the fragment that is launched in the activity in the stack. It is and once the fragments is added, you need to commit, so that fragment transaction.commit will be called so that the fragment will be added into that container. So this is how we get, once it is added into the stack, whenever the user clicks on back button, we need to retrieve the stack. So we'll be overriding on back pressed method. In that we'll be checking if the fragment, if any entry is there in the back stack. If it is greater than 0, we'll be popping up the fragment that is added into the stack. Otherwise we'll be using the super method that is already present. So as I explained earlier, we'll be using the method add to backstack so that we can provide better user experience. So if some 10 fragments are launched on activity, and when the user clicks on back button, so the user should be knowing the instance of the previously launched fragments. If there is no fragment that is added into the back, we can close an activity. So we'll be adding into the backstack, and while retrieving, we'll be using pop backstack method. So whenever you want to communicate between the fragments, say now you click on the fragment A, and if you when the user clicks on fragment A, and if you want to launch fragment B, as I told earlier, the activity will not, the fragment will not be knowing on which activity it has been hosted. So we'll be creating an interface to communicate between the fragments, and you'll be implementing the interface in an activity in which you are including the fragments. And whenever you perform some operation, such as you click on some item in fragment A, you implement, in the sense you send the data to that interface method, and in the activity we will be implementing that interface method based on the data that we will be getting in the implementation state of an activity. Will be navigating according to the business logic that we'll see through an example. Now let us look into the life cycle and what are the things that we have learnt in the fragment. Thank you. Have a great day.